On 8th of March 1942, we lost one of the greatest chess players of all time, Jose Raul Capablanca. But just 1 year and 1 day after that, on 9th of March 1943, was born Robert James Fischer. And this boy would actually be the reason for chess to become a global phenomenon. Before Bobby came, obviously chess was very much respected game, but Bobby put chess on the map of the world, and he made it the way it looks today. It's all because of Fischer, I think. As Karpov has himself said, we owe greatly to Robert James Fischer. So basically, I'm going to cover 60 of his memorable games from his own book, My 16 Memorable Games, his own notes. I'm using his own variations. These are really high class, high quality games, and you can't get better than Fischer, of course. So Fischer versus Sherwin. This is the game one, played in 1957. It's an excellent game, and so let's dive into it. Basically, I'll be dividing this video into three parts, into two parts basically. The one will include the opening and the game in itself, and the second will actually focus a lot of strategy, because looking through great games and classics is very important, but also learning something out of them is very important. So I'm going to focus particularly on strategy and how you can use the strategies which Bobby used to win games. So this will be a highly instructive video. Let's start the game. Bobby, obviously playing white, started with the move pawn to e4, best by test, as he usually said. Pawn to c5, Sherwin replies with the Sicilian defense. At this point, it was relatively new and unexplored as compared to now. Now it's too theoretical. There are books as large as this volume with me over here, and it's a lifetime's work in the Sicilian now. But at this point, it was roughly, it's a very fresh opening. Knight to f3. Seems like Bobby is going into the main line. Pawn to e6. Is it the Paulson? Is it the Taimanov? Sveshnikov? We'll see. Bobby in this position played the pawn to d3. Now, which is this opening? Basically, this is the reverse King's Indian. It was actually one of Bobby's favorite system. It's not really an opening. It's actually a system which you can use against various openings. And the idea is very simple. It's an Indian type of an opening. Basically, you're going to move your pawn to g3, bishop to g2, castle, c3. You're going to play very simple developing moves. It is like a spring. You wait until the opponent makes a mistake, or you wait to expand until you're fully developed, and only then you strike. It's like a spring, you know, it's like a very nice recoiled spring. It's actually the reversed King's Indian, and when you play this from white side, you actually get a one move's advantage. You have extra move. So Bobby's favorite system, playing from the white side, he thought it was really a good idea to play this. Actually, he was one of the best exponents in this system. So if you want to check out King's Indian games, you are a fan of King's Indian, as I am, you should check out Fischer's game first and foremost. Knight to c6, developing a piece, very good move. g3, white is not bothered with anything that black does, he's just going to continue his own development. Now comes knight to f6, bishop to g2, bishop to e7. So black is not showing his hand. He might play his pawn to d6, he might push it to d5, we'll see that. Castles. Now, in today's modern theory, this move would be called somewhat of a dubious move, because I already know the address of your king. You know, white's pawn structure, as we are going to discuss, is pointing towards this side. So quickly showing your intention by castling is actually a little bit fatal. Sometimes you can actually, d5 is the most common move in this position. d6 is also played in order to continue with something like, let's say, queen c7, bishop d7, and in fact black also mostly castles queen side. This is very popular idea, but in this game Sherwin castles on the king side. Now comes knight b to d2. The knight can actually swing to c4, or more popularly on the f1 square, from which it can go to either h2 after pushing the pawn, as we are gonna see. Rook to b8. Now his opponent Sherwin, Fischer's opponent, played this move with his little pinky and had a very cunning smile on his face. Bobby, however, thought that this move was actually a little poor and it doesn't really impress him. So what is so weird about this move that Bobby was not impressed? Because his opponent definitely had an idea. Maybe he's planning to go with b5 b4, which actually does not suit this position very well, because in that case if your bishop is pre-educated on the long diagonal, that is the best then that's the best plan obviously, to push with the b pawn. Maybe Sherwin is planning to go b6 and put the bishop on b7, possible. But obviously Bobby was not impressed with this move. He continued with the typical move, rook to e1, a very sensible move. In case you play pawn to d5, I can always put my pawn on e5, the rook always protects it, and also knight has been made a square to retreat. And this is the position where we are going to discuss the strategy, and this is super duper important. So let's pay attention to this. So here we go. Pawns are the soul of chess. Understanding any kind of position, you need to understand the pawn structure and what it basically says. So let's go from the very basic. Let's study this position and understand what both players actually intend. You can see White's position. In White's position, the pawns are actually pointing towards the king side, which means that White is going to mostly play on the king side. He will have, if he has anything to play, he will have initiative on the king side. So his plan might include pawn to f4, pawn to f5, or even h4, h5, playing things on the king side. However, if you look at Black's position, he's actually, you can see there is a pawn on e6. He might actually prepare to play d6 or d5. Both are very flexible. In fact, when the pawn comes to d5, his plan will be clear. You can see his pawn structure will be pointing towards the queen side, which means that his plan will include to attack on the queen side with subsequent pawn moves on the queen side. So Black is playing right in the center and on the queen side, whereas White is actually playing on the king side. At the same time, White also has some extra options. You can see White can at the same time play pawn to c3. Just to stop, there is a knight on c6, just to stop the knight from going to d4 square. And in fact, after playing pawn to c3, it's very typical in positions like the Italian or the roller pace to play pawn to c3 followed by an pawn expansion in the center with pawn to d4. And in fact, if you get the chance, which Bobby did, you can also play pawn to e5, get a huge center and initiative on the king side, because the pawns will then be pointing towards the king side and give White a lot of space. So what are White plans here? What White wants to achieve over here is c3, d4, e5. Basically, that is what White is trying to achieve. He might include the moves pawn to a3 sometimes to stop knight b4. In certain cases, that is included in the King's Indian. Also, sometimes pawn to h4 is a very typical move. Moving the rook's pawn is very typical in the King's Indian. So this is what White wants. Now, what does Black want over here? You can see Black's pawn on e6 really determines a lot of things, and his pawn on c5 as well. He has a good grip in the center on the d4 square. He would like to continue with pawn to d5, pawn to b5, pawn to b4 or c4, and trying to play on the queen side or in the center. So that is his strategy. At the same time, he has a bishop on e7. He has a rook on f8. He will tuck his rook on e8 and put his bishop back to f8, in which case he'll be able to defend against any kind of severe attacks. So that is the kind of strategy that Black is employing. He is playing in the center, whereas White actually can also play in the center. At the same time, he can also play on the king side by shifting his pieces, knight from d2 to f1 to h2 to g4 to f6, sacrificing it over there. Very typical plan, as we'll see in the subsequent games of Fischer or Botvinnik. Very typical ideas. So what White wants is a king side attack. What Black wants is a queen side attack. Now, this is basically the strategy that both players are roughly following. Now let's go back to the game. So this is where we left the game. It is Black to play. White has just made the move rook to e1, preparing the move knight to f1 as we have discussed, or at the same time preparing to play pawn to e5 if in case Black advances with the d5 pawn. So Black plays pawn to d6. Again, Black's setup is a little bit modest. He should be playing more ambitiously, as Bobby says in the book. He should be playing with pawn to d5 in a very direct way, because White is actually planning. It's like a spring, right? White's setup is like a spring. It can burst open at the right moment, as happened in the game. So Black should actually start his initiative. This move, pawn to d6, not bad at all. In fact, very typical nowadays, but also a little bit pale. Now, as we have discussed, White's strategy can include to advance on the king side or in the center. That's what Bobby does. He plays pawn to c3. This does a few things. Supports the pawn move to d4 and then the pawn move to e5. It makes square for the queen. At some point this can happen. So let's see what happens now. On to b6. Again, a very modest move by black, by Sherwin. He should have continued with the pawn move to b5. That was much more ambitious, as Bobby says in his book. But pawn to b6. So you can see black is not really very certain about his plans, whereas now sensing the uncertainty of black. This is where Fischer is really good, and Kasparov describes him that he's able to sense things and he's able to sense his opponent's nervousness. So Bobby here decides to push the pawn with d4 and get the initiative. Now he's going to break open he's going to open up the spring, and white's position is going to burst out with activity. So takes and queen c7 is actually the best way to play, but black here played queen to c7, and this is where Fischer says it's too late to put the queen on c7. In fact, the queen and the rook does not give a good impression. They are tactical targets. Grandmasters are always able to see and pick up such little minute details in the position. The queen on c7 and the rook on b8 for normal players would not really seem like a target or a weakness, but Fischer thought that it was a weakness, and this is how he exploited it. Pawn to e5. So let's pause and let's understand what has both players achieved. Did white achieve his aim of pushing in the center with c3? d4, e5, obviously he did. Did black achieve his aim of pushing with d5, c4 or b5? Not at all. In fact, black has been playing very dull chess, very modestly, and white got everything that he wanted. So Fischer's strategy has perfectly worked out, whereas black has been doing the waiting game and it has turned out to be bad for him. Now black put his knight in the center, knight to d5. Knight to d7 was even worse, because now ed6, bishop takes. Now Fischer always goes for the bishops, and sensing that the queen and the rook are on the same diagonal, knight to e4 obviously comes as the best move. Takes. Bishop to f4 can actually win a pawn, because now if you move the queen, obviously then we are getting the exchange. But in order to stop that, you have to play e5. Now comes knight takes pawn, knight takes, and over here you're going to win a pawn. There's a lot of pressure on this knight. There's a lot of pressure over here. It's at the end of all of this complications, black will be down a pawn. So let's go back. After the pawn move to e5, black decides, let me go in the center, but in fact this turns out to badly. Takes, knight to e4. Why is Bobby playing the way he's playing? Well, with this move he's not just developing a piece, but as we have said, he has realized that the rook on b8 and the queen on c7 are tactical targets, and his point is to eliminate the eliminate the bishop with knight takes on d6. In the game, c4 was played. Well, why was c4 played? Why not just put the bishop back with something like bishop e7? In fact, this is tragic because of white playing pawn to c4. Wherever knight goes, he can go to the b4 square, or he can retreat f6. For example, over here. Now, finally, you see the point. Bishop to f4, exploiting the weak position of both the queen and the rook, and black is losing tremendous amount of material over here. So let's go back. After knight to d5, takes, knight e4. We know that the threat is c4, so black himself decides to play c4 over here with pawn to c4. In fact, this actually turns out to be very bad for him. Why is it bad for him? Well, the simple reason is you're taking out all the tension from the center. There's no pressure on the center. No one is attacking these pawns. They are super solid. They are as like rock, and you can see they are pointing towards the king side, which means white's plan is very simple. As always, he wants to attack on the king side, whereas black's strategy on the queen side has not really worked out. So everything is happening according to Fischer. Now comes knight takes d6. Bobby got what he wanted. Queen takes, knight to g5. Now this is a very cunning move. In one of the videos I've made earlier, I have discussed about how a grandmaster thinks. A grandmaster always wants activity and quality of pieces. He always keeps improving his pieces. There are three elements in chess. One is material advantage. Another is superiority of pieces, quality of pieces, and the third one is gain of tempo. With the move knight to g5, Fischer is intending to improve his knight. Knight on f3 is good, but knight on e4 is even better, so he's planning to get it back. At the same time, by doing it, he is also attacking one of the targets. We have discussed this in How to Think Like a Grandmaster, the video I made. Bobby is attacking the target on h7. h7 is a big target, and you can see the bishop has been undeveloped till now, so that bishop doesn't really contribute in the defense. And obviously you can't directly play a move like knight f6 because of bishop to f4 totally losing the game. That's why in this position he has to be very careful. So after the move knight to g5, Bobby is actually provoking black to continue with g6 or h6 in order to create some weakness, in after which he can exploit that. For example, something like here, here, and this is still better than what happened in the game. But now Bobby does have a target over here. This is a hook, and he can actually at some point make this sacrifice bishop into h6. Obviously not right now, but at some point Bobby can plan, and with a good preparation he can try to attack. So that is the entire plan of putting the knight on g5 to create weaknesses. Now comes knight c to e7, queen to c2. Again, we have a target, we need to attack it. Targets are supposed to be attacked, and that's how you create initiative. How to get an attacking position? You attack opponent's weaknesses, and that's how you get an attacking position. Now comes knight to g6, so his knight covers the weakness on h7. But obviously now Bobby, you will see how focused Bobby is. Bobby, all that he can see is the pawn on h7, and he goes for it. Pawn to h4. The pushing the h pawn has been very typical in the King's Indian positions, and here it is as well. The pawn is going to h5, and once the knight moves, queen takes on h7 would be a checkmate. So knight to f6, giving extra protection to the h7 square pawn. So even if you push h5, now the h7 square is not hanging. But again, your old wounds are showing off, because the queen and the rook are still targets. They are very badly placed, and in fact we would very much like to play the move bishop to f4. So what should we do? Right now we can't really play that move because of knight capturing it. Bobby here sees that, he feels like there is a tactic. Great tactical players always feel when there is a tactic. Like Tal, he always felt there is something in the position and you need to slow down and think. And this is where Bobby thought for some time and came up with a very strong combination. Knight takes on h7. Boom, directly sacrificing the knight on h7. It can be captured by two pieces, the knight and the king, and both are losing. Obviously we are attacking the rook. If he's not going to react, we'll capture either of this piece. So in the game, knight takes was played obviously, but what happens if king takes? The point is, now that the knight has been pinned, now you can directly play bishop to f4. There is no threat of knight capturing the bishop, and you're going to win material over here. Big advantage for white. So black decides, okay, I'll take with the knight. What's your point? Fischer continues with pawn to h5. So first he deflected the defender of the h5 square by sacrificing, and now he deflected the defender of the f4 square by attacking him with the pawn. Bishop, the knight moves. Obviously going over here is totally hopeless, because simply this move, and black does not have any kind of great activity. In fact, he's very simply losing without any much hope. So black decides, let's stir up things, let's mix up things, and let's play knight to h4 anyway. Fischer does not hesitate and first continues to play bishop to f4. He does not directly capture the knight. It is very important, because that would create a very bad pawn structure. His king will be opened up. Not really a great impression. Fischer plays the strongest move, bishop to f4. Now, this is again gain of tempo, one of the three elements of chess. You are attacking, but you are attacking with tempo. You are attacking while pushing the opponent's pieces back. Queen is attacked, queen to d8. Again, you see that we did not capture the free piece. I mean, the rook over here, because in that case, Bobby would have had to lose his bishop. Bishops are very dear to him. If takes, this would have happened. And actually black is fine here, to say the least. In fact, he might even get an initiative. This is a target. Knight g5 can come, and actually black is slightly ahead in material. Might be even good for black. So Bobby decides not to go for this, not to capture the rook in the corner, but rather he captures the knight and keeps his bishop pair. Bobby was one of the greatest players to use the bishop back. He was like really the best exponent with the bishops. So now comes rook to b7. Again, black is urging Bobby, please capture the rook, please take the rook, so I'll get the bishop. And if you really take that rook after bishop takes, let me just show you what happens. White's king is horribly exposed. This bishop is way stronger than any of the rook right now. Queen takes is coming, queen f6 is coming. Black has a lot of compensation for the exchange. So obviously Bobby does not want to give back the attack. He wants to continue the attacking, and that's why he plays pawn to h6, creating weaknesses in the opponent's position. Queen takes h4, and now normally players would play something like bishop to g3, queen to e4, something like that. But Bobby again does everything with gain of tempo. Zwischenzug, you attack my bishop, I don't need to defend it. I'm going to attack your rook over here on f8. This is how the mind of Fischer or Tal works. If you attack him, they don't directly defend. They play these intermediate moves, and it's very well known that in such kind of positions, even in the game of the century, Fischer played such moves, intermediate moves. It's very typical of him, even of Tal. He captured, and this was actually a big mistake. Black should have just moved his rook over here or here, keeping the pawn as a shield, but sometimes this can also turn out bad. So it's very difficult to in a game to judge if whether you should keep the pawn or you should capture it. But generally, the pawn is best. The pawn has to be kept because that acts as a shield. White can't really attack if that pawn is over here. So you're using white's own pieces to stop the attack. So that was really the best. Captures actually exposes the king. And again, Bobby does not defend his bishop, but rather, I mean, he does, but in a different way. Rook to e4, developing a piece and threatening bishop to e5, capturing the queen over here. So the queen moves, and now again comes a very strong move. Rook to e3. You know, for a long time this rook has been hanging, but Bobby doesn't really care about that rook because white's bishop is going to be much more important, and this bishop has not even moved a single time. You don't really want to make him the best piece on the board by capturing this rook. You know, the black bishop will be really good over there. So with the move rook to e3, excellent move. Bobby plans to play rook to g3 or even rook to h3 first. Very strong. Now comes pawn to f5, making some square for the king to run. It's time to escape. Rook to h3. The queen has to retreat. Obviously, you can't really go to g4 or g6 because of rook g3. It will be a pin, so the queen directly goes back. Again, you see this rook is hanging. Bishop at 6, attacking the other rook. So if white wants, white can get any of the rook, but he doesn't care about material. You know, material is just one of the elements in chess. Just a second. Alright, let's go back. I had some guests. It's Diwali over here right now, so we have expecting some guests. Okay, the queen goes back. Now, you know, after this, Bobby can really, as we have discussed, capture any of the rook either on f5, on f8 or on b7, but he does not really bother. He's focusing on attack. He wants to keep his attack going. He's not really greedy. And this is a 13-year-old boy. You can see his maturity. He's 13-year-old. He understands when not to capture material and what's really important in position. Here comes bishop to e5. Check. The attack continues. Obviously, the king can't really step away from the knight because if rook takes knight, that will be disastrous. So he just plays knight to f6. And that creates a new weakness. The knight on f6 is a target. It can be attacked, and that's what Bobby goes for. He plays queen to d2. The queen wants to swing to the h6 square or the g5 square. In both cases, attacking the target on f6. You know, there are targets, there are weaknesses, and the way you attack, the very simple way, very simple method to attack is to attack the opponent's targets, and that's what everyone does. You know, that's a very simple way of getting initiative. Attack opponent's weaknesses. King to f7. The king unpins and tries to run away. Now comes queen to g5. Putting pressure on the target. Black is supposed to defend over here, and it's really a difficult defense. He plays queen to e7, one of the only ways to defend the knight, because if you just really move the knight, let's say something over here or over here, there would have been rook at 7, a very deadly move, simply winning the game. So queen e7 played. Now comes bishop takes f6. Why was this move played? Simple reason is you want to enter through the h7 square, and knight was a defender, so you eliminate the defender. queen takes rook h7, and the game ends over here after the move queen f6 and rook into h7. Basically, if you just capture this, Bobby wins a huge amount of material after bishop takes rook. This is totally winning. Obviously, don't forget the rook on h1. He's been sleeping, but he will be entering the game, of course. So rook takes h7 over here, and at this point, bishop to c6. This was the last move of the game. Sherwin resigned the game. If you put, let's say, if you put over here, this rook over here, we are just going to capture first on e6 and then on d7. And if you play something like bishop e6, just takes here. Here, this is very simply winning. The bishop is pinned. The square is covered. Rook is attacked. This rook will very soon come in the game. This is totally a disastrous position for black. So obviously Fischer went on to win, and this was the last move of the game. So excellent game by Robert James Fischer. This was the first game in his book, My 60 Memorable Games. I wish I'd be looking at more of his games. So hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching, and do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Videos on the way.